Florida Gators take on the South Carolina Gamecocks this weekend, and I will tell you, this is a game I look forward to very much every year. I don't know why I hate them so much, but I hate them. But now it's crossover Thursday time on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are here with Locked On Crossover Action. Brandon Olson from Locked On Gators, Andrew Lyon from Locked On Gamecocks, and it's Thursday, so it's always Crossover Thursday here in the SEC. Before we get into it, download the free Upside app at upside.app.link/lockedon to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. And Andrew, we have a game this weekend. I'm excited for it. I'm assuming you are, since last year, Gamecocks ran for almost 300 yards on the Florida Gators, and that's really fun. But going into this game, what is probably your biggest story for the Gamecocks going into it?
Well, Brandon, it's funny that you mentioned the running game because the biggest story for the Gamecocks right now is arguably the status of star running back Marshawn Lloyd being up in the air right now. Shane Beamer said on his SEC teleconference call on Wednesday that Lloyd practiced with the team and quote unquote looked good, which could mean a bevy of different things coming from the head coach. But Marshawn has made a big impact for this offense this season. In South Carolina's game against Kentucky, he had 24 touches for 141 yards and 1 touchdown in the Gamecocks' first win at Kentucky since 2012. South Carolina, of course, ended their winless drought against Texas A&M, and in that game, Lloyd had 116 total yards and 2 touchdowns on just 20 touches. And for the season, Lloyd's averaging around 6.23 yards every time he is touching the football. So, you could do whatever kind of numbers game you want to play with that kind of average. But, how I describe Marshawn, he is arguably the most talented running back South Carolina's had since Marcus Lattimore. And before his knee injuries, Marcus Lattimore was probably the best running back in all of college football during his time. So, Marshawn plays a big part of this Gamecock offense. And if the offense does not have him, hypothetically speaking, they would be in a world of trouble in my mind in terms of trying to establish this offense, which relies a lot on the deep play action passing game and also trying to get some horizontal RPOs going out to the edge. Marcus Stafford likes to call that a lot in this offense. But none of that will be nearly as successful without Marshawn and the threat of that running game being there in the backfield for South Carolina.
Yeah, you mentioned Marcus Lattimore, and I just want you to know my knees hurt thinking of that video. That was one of the most gruesome injuries that I've ever seen. It was, ugh. But yeah, I mean, Florida's run defense for a huge majority of the season has been just absolutely horrible. Oh my goodness. It is like, I feel like at certain points you might as well have me on that D line. They get pushed back so easily. I've been saying it. If you're a Locked On Gators listener, I have been calling this defensive line soft for the majority of this year. They just get pushed back. They seem very passive at certain points, and you're playing SEC football. You're playing defensive line. You cannot be soft, and they have been. So Marshawn Lloyd, his potential of if he plays and if he does play, how healthy he is going to be something that's interesting for me. Like, obviously, if he plays, he's healthy enough to play, but it's a matter of what are we getting? Are we seeing 60% Marshawn Lloyd? Are we seeing 90% Marshawn Lloyd? What are we seeing here? And so that's kind of what terrifies me as well, because Florida's defense against Texas A&M, second half, phenomenal. First half, absolutely wrecked. The first play for Texas A&M went, I think it was 63 yards on a run. So this defense is just so wildly inconsistent, which has been the story of the season for the Florida Gators defense. And I'm terrified to see if it's if Marshawn Lloyd's healthy, just how bad it's going to be. And I think from the Gators perspective, probably the biggest story, which quarterback is showing up for the Florida Gators? Are we getting the Anthony Richardson that hasn't turned the ball over in 3 games, which is not something that we're used to seeing? We were at the point where we were like, okay, we know he's going to turn the ball over at least once because that's just what he's done, but hasn't turned the ball over in 3 games, has had passing touchdowns every week since the Tennessee game, which he started off the year with 3 straight games of no passing touchdowns and interceptions or fumbles. So it's which Anthony Richardson are we getting? Because it's going to be a rocking crowd. It always is in Gainesville. And Anthony Richardson has struggled at home. And he's pretty openly been like, hey man, like 90,000 Gators fans cheering my name and having these high expectations gets into my head, which that is that scares the crap out of me. If we're being honest, the fact that he's publicly also saying, yeah, I get in my own
Yeah.
head and just crumble, that terrifies me. So I need to know which Anthony Richardson the Florida Gators are getting.
Right. Yeah. Anthony Richardson, of course, is going to play a big part in this game. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that in a little bit with our key matchups. But another quick storyline I'm going to watch here, Brandon, just from South Carolina side of things, is their quest to regain some national trust or even just trust from SEC media folk. Because obviously, South Carolina was on a 4-game winning streak earlier in the season. You can talk about, just how good of a 4-game winning streak it was considering the competition and the teams and how they played at this point. But either way, it was a 4-game winning streak. South Carolina had seen that often in the previous few years. And then, of course, the Missouri game happened. It derailed all that momentum. There was questions galore about the offensive side of the ball in the week following all of that. And now, South Carolina's had a nice little bounce back against Vanderbilt where they also, had some lapses, especially on defense as well. And they're facing a Florida team that, of course, from a brand standpoint, is one of the biggest in all of college football. A team that, despite South Carolina Gamecocks defeating them last year, there's a lot of things that are said about that game. The team had quit on Dan Mullen. There was an illness going around the locker room, which is a very fair reason, for that game maybe being as lopsided as it was. But, South Carolina in games like this against national brands, you've got to show up. Programs like South Carolina, you can't just have one win one year like they did last year. You have to validate that by winning multiple years in a row. And, Billy Napier is a first-year head coach, and Napier has had some, positive moments this season, especially on the recruiting trail for you guys, obviously. But, if you're Shane Beamer, with the expectations you had coming into this season, you really can't lose a game against a first-year head coach, even if it is in Billy Napier and it's in the swamp. You can't have that, especially if it's lopsided. You cannot have that. You have to come in here. You got to show that you're getting things back on the right track and that South Carolina can still finish off this year with a really solid record.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things too for South Carolina is Florida. There's obviously 3 games remaining for both sides in the regular season bowl games. We'll see what happens, like who they play. But South Carolina has Florida and then Tennessee, and then a Clemson team that I will say they're still a good Clemson team. They did not belong to be in the top 4 last week, and that's why they're not
Not at
like
all.
they were the worst top 4 team I've ever seen. So, but it's still a very good Clemson team, especially on games that they're on. Their biggest issue is just that they're so wildly inconsistent as well. So I think that this is one of the last real. I don't want to say winnable games. Every game's winnable, but this is one of the last few games where South Carolina should go into this game and say, like, this is a game we should win. Which, I mean, gambling odds disagree, but I also don't think that Florida should be favored by a touchdown in this one. But we'll get to that later.
Right, absolutely. And of course, a big part of this game is going to be the players. What are the key matchups to watch in this contest? Of course, Florida is stacked with 4 and 5-star talent. South Carolina's got some pretty talented players in their own right. Maybe they haven't had the seasons they envisioned coming into this year, but maybe this could be the game against a Florida defense that, as you mentioned earlier, has sometimes not had some very good moments. Maybe this is the kind of game that they could blow up. We're going to talk about all that in just a couple moments, but firstly, let's have a serious talk. Inflation has all of us thinking about ways to cut back. And for me, and maybe you, Brandon, that's meant cutting down on my time spent on the road. So I don't have to buy gas as often. But whether it's driving less, dining out less, or buying less from the grocery store, we can all agree there's nothing fun about less money. That's why I started using Upside. Upside is an incredible app for when you're on the go and you're buying something because you get cash back on every purchase. So to get started, download the free Upside app and use our promo code LOCKED. You'll get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Upside users are earning more than $1 million in cash back every week. And if you still question just how good they are, we'll let the 4.8 star rating on the App Store speak for itself. So download the free Upside app and use promo code LOCKED to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. I'll say it one more time. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more using the promo code LOCKED.
All right, now we're back with Locked On crossover action. Brandon Olson, Locked On Gators, Andrew Lyon, Locked On Gamecocks. And this is a game that I don't know what it is. I always like the South Carolina game. I don't like South Carolina, but I always look forward to this game, and I'm looking forward to it. And I wanted to start off with the matchup that you brought up earlier, so I'll let you talk about it, and you kind of brought this up off air, but you brought it up, and I would like to talk about it because it is also a thing that concerned me for Florida going into this game.
Right. Okay. So South Carolina, of course, has a star tight end in Jaheim Bell. And with Jaheim Bell maybe being involved in the underneath passing game, that would mean that he would be going up against Florida's linebacker core a lot in this contest, more specifically, linebacker Ventrell Miller. Now, obviously, Brandon, in our conversation, this hit home to you a little bit because Ventrell Miller has been a big part of this Gators defense. Obviously, no one's going to question his leadership. No one's going to question his production. Ventrell Miller's been a big part of the Gators defense throughout his entire career there. But in terms of this matchup, I think if you're South Carolina, especially in the passing game, you have to like your odds here. Ventrell Miller, as good as a run defender as he is in the box, I'm not quite sure I like his odds going one-on-one against Jaheim Bell in the short passing game. I think that in terms of his sideline-to-sideline speed, he can cover grass really well, but Jaheim Bell's got incredible route running when he's been given opportunities, which is another question in and of itself, if Jaheim Bell is going to be given that chance to maybe exploit this kind of matchup. Of course, Jaheim Bell has seen some snaps at running back as well because of Marshawn Lloyd's injury over the past couple of weeks. So I think especially if you're South Carolina, I would draw up a lot of one-cut outside routes for Jaheim Bell in this contest. I think that if you do that, you can take advantage of maybe the lack of coverage ability in this Gator linebacker core, more specifically Ventrell Miller, which not to pick on this part, but he also has had a share of injuries, some serious injuries during his time as a Gator linebacker. So if you're South Carolina, this is a key matchup right here that I think you could exploit. But of course, Brandon, you might have some pushback on this. So what are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I do have some pushback because, like I told you off air, you mess with Ventrell, you're messing with me. So I would say that I will fight tooth and nail for that man, and I'm not even on his team. But I see the leadership that he brings is incredible. One thing that interests me is that in recent weeks, Florida's approached the tight end position differently defensively because earlier in the season it was just, hey, Utah, throw to your tight ends almost exclusively, pick up a ton of yards, and almost win the game. And you saw that even Kentucky, who I am not impressed with their tight ends, had success throwing to their tight ends. So it worried me a little bit. In recent weeks, Florida's seen a bit of a defensive shift, pretty much since the bye. They've approached tight ends differently. You look at the Georgia game, they played a lot more man on the best tight end group that I've probably ever seen in college football. And they're better than a lot of NFL tight end rooms. They're just three deep with all guys that first round talent. Whether or not they go there, we'll see. But first round talent. And it's the X factor for me here. Trey Dean III, who Trey has been roasted relentlessly on Gators Twitter. They don't like him that much. Say what you will about that. I don't want to get involved in that part. But in recent weeks, he's been doing what I begged this coaching staff to do in the offseason. I said Trey Dean is 6'3", 210 pounds, jacked, incredibly long arms. Make him a tight end eraser. And in recent weeks, they've let him play man coverage, and tight end production has significantly dropped. I want to see them do that with Jaheim Bell because Jaheim Bell is a freak. There is no way around it. He is a physical freak. He's a mutant. Like he is. you talk about having tight ends in the run game like Chig Okonkwo with the Tennessee Titans and Jonnu Smith did with the Patriots and the Titans. That's what Jaheim Bell could be. Like there are legitimate places that list him as running back / tight end. That is ridiculous. Like he's that athletic. Trading in the past 2 weeks since the bye, been targeted 11 times in coverage, allowed 4 catches for 60 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, 2 passes broken up. I would like to see him be the guy that kind of draws Jaheim Bell here, because Jaheim Bell, matchup nightmare, no matter who you put on him. But I think trading is your best bet, because as much as I love Ventrell Miller, I think he'd get torched if he was left with Jaheim Bell. As much as I love Ventrell Miller and as much as I like Amari Burney, I think that covering Jaheim Bell is one of the most difficult tasks you can give someone in college football. Like he's not as good, in my opinion, as Kyle Pitts was, but he is that athletic size matchup nightmare that I think gives defensive coordinators fits. And I imagine Patrick Toney has not slept well this week trying to figure out how to stop or slow him down. I think one of the biggest matchups that I'm looking for is Spencer Rattler against this defense. Just in general, because Spencer Rattler is hot or cold. I don't think there's a way around that. We both have quarterbacks that are just either really good or really bad. And Spencer Rattler, had a little, we'll call it a slump buster against Vanderbilt. Because it is what it is. He hadn't thrown a touchdown for 2 games before that. Threw 3 against Vanderbilt. Great win, great game for him. And he is obviously physically very talented. Dating back to Oklahoma, he was someone who, whether or not he was getting guys in the end zone, he was efficient. He's taking care of the ball. He's making plays that a lot of other quarterbacks wouldn't want to make. And he kind of fell off somehow. I don't even know what happened with Oklahoma. He fell out of favor. Caleb Williams became the guy. And when he went to South Carolina, it terrified me, because I was just like, this kid, if he's on, is incredible. And I think the matchup is trying to not only stop him as a passer, and he's not necessarily thought of as a scrambler, but he can extend plays a lot. And that is what worries me. When he starts extending plays, we saw Tennessee gash Florida by extending plays. Hendon Hooker did that like it was his job to literally just wait 8 seconds and have a wide open receiver. So Spencer Rattler is the thing that terrifies me when you're looking at how this Florida Gators defense can stop him, because you got a great run game if Lloyd's healthy, and then you got Spencer Rattler can throw it to Jaheim Bell, and he's a physical freak, and that just terrifies me.
Oh yeah, no, and Spencer Rattler, of course, it will. The laden of this game, or the burden of trying to win this game, I guess, will fall more on his shoulders, especially if Marshawn Lloyd is out for this contest. And of course, that was a question mark even for the Vanderbilt game, as bad as that Commodore defense is. And I mean, it is really, really bad. It was a question mark of just how much he could handle that kind of pressure in that moment after a loss like that. And he handled it pretty well. Another quick matchup I'm going to watch here, Brandon, is South Carolina's defensive backs against Florida's wideouts. And with this, I'm not really so much talking about the talent, although there is some talent here with both these position units, but more so the size and physicality, because South Carolina likes to run a lot of man coverage in Clayton White's scheme, because they got some pretty decently sized corners. I mean, Cam Smith could be a first-round pick in April for the Gamecocks. 6 foot, 188 pounds. Marcellus Dial, 6 foot, 192 pounds. Darius Rush, 6'2", 200 pounds. You don't have that kind of size across the board in very many defensive back rooms at that cornerback spot. Florida is one of the few teams that, when looking at this roster and who they have normally playing out there, they could actually match that size and physicality. Xavier Henderson, Justin Shorter, Ricky Pearsall, and Trent Whittemore. Maybe there's someone else you could throw in there, Brandon. But those 4 guys were the main guys that I saw playing in the film that I watched. And their average height and weight is 6'2" 3/4 inches and 206 pounds. So one of the more physically imposing wide receiver units that South Carolina might play all year. And there's been some injury issues in this secondary. So they're extremely thin at certain spots. So the question really is Clayton White going to continue to call for man coverage like he has for most of this season, which could both, put guys in tough spots and maybe make them more susceptible to injury because of all the contact, and maybe give Anthony Richardson a chance to make some big scramble plays, because when you play man coverage against a quarterback like that, you're taking a real massive risk with his running ability. Or will he stray away from maybe a strength with this secondary and call a lot more zone, to try to protect those guys and, maybe make it a little bit more easier for these corners? That's going to be a matchup that I'm also going to watch in this contest.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it works out there. I mean, Justin Shorter last week did not play because he was dealing with an injury that we have not been told really what it is, but he was a game time decision. We'll see what happens this week. Gators fans know that right now we're recording shortly before the depth chart comes out because Billy likes to go, hey, late Wednesday night is where we're going to put it out. So we don't know yet. I would imagine Justin Shorter is a questionable decision, which we'll see. He's been huge. I think that you'll look at maybe Caleb Payday Douglas stepping up a little bit. He played quite a bit against Texas A&M in Justin Shorter's absence. Ricky Pearsall, Slick Ricky, Pretty Ricky, whatever you want to call him. He's, I think, going to be the guy that Florida looks for, where he doesn't have that great physical size, but against man coverage, he's been great this year. He's one of the few Florida receivers that can actually do this weird thing. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Andrew, but receivers are supposed to do this called create separation. Ricky Pearsall is one of the few guys that can do that on this Florida Gators team. So I'm kind of looking to see how that shapes up. And I can tell you now, if I'm South Carolina, I'm not calling man. Anthony Richardson's one of the most athletic people on the field at all times. I'm not calling man. We saw him last week. I get it. It was a designed run play, 60-yard rushing touchdown where he outran everybody. And I think at that point, you can't give him that window. We saw LSU, I believe it was an 81-yard rushing touchdown. You saw Utah, 45-yard rushing touchdown. He's consistently gashed teams as a scrambler, especially. Like, yeah, last week was a designed run. He's consistently picked up huge chunk yardage as a scrambler. And I think that if you're any defense, playing man coverage against him is a huge mistake unless you can consistently generate pressure as well and you consistently have someone in the spy. We saw Kentucky do it. We saw Tennessee do it where you spy, you blitz the hell out of them, and you play man coverage on the back end. But even then, you're one screw up away from a huge rushing touchdown. So we'll see what happens with that one. It's certainly something that I'm looking forward to. We're about to make our predictions for the game. And first, I got to tell you about my favorite sports book, by the way, BetOnline, because this crossover is brought to you by BetOnline. The Florida Gators are currently 8-point favorites in this one, which means if you're, I'm putting you on game here. If you're a Gamecocks fan, if you're a Gators fan, you know what to do. Gators are favored, which means bet South Carolina to cover the spread. Florida, in every game this season, they've been favored, have not covered the spread. They're not a team that covers. Good teams win, great teams cover. Florida, not a great team right now. They have not been able to cover every game that they've been underdogs. They've covered though, but unfortunately, that doesn't help us at all in this matchup. So check out Bet Online, whether you're doing it on your mobile device, like that's how I always do it. You want to use your computer, bet South Carolina to cover the spread. They probably will, but head to the website today, use your mobile device, check out all the trends and action, and check out Bet Online. It's where the game starts. And to wrap up this crossover action, we are making predictions here. And Andrew, I don't know, do you want to go first? You want me to go first? How do you want to do it? I'm
I'll
open
let
to
you go
whatever.
first. I'll let you go first. I'm interested to hear what
Okay.
you got to say.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'll do it. Like I said, Florida right now covered or favored by 8. That ain't happening. That's just not what's going to happen. I think Florida will win this game. I think it'll be closer. Florida's a great team where if you're a struggling offense to get back on track, you had Vanderbilt where you got back on track, and now you're South Carolina, you take the next step. I think Florida wins this game 35-31. I don't think it's going to be a necessarily low scoring game. That's not what Florida's been doing. I will say I think Florida can win this one. I think Florida's offense can make some plays because they seem to be getting back on track. Anthony Richardson just played his most complete game as a quarterback, which thank God that we finally saw that happen. And he looks more comfortable than we've seen him look. I also think that this being the last home game of the season for the Gators, this being the last game in the swamp if you're a Gators senior, I think they're just going to be playing with an added fire here. Especially, I know a lot of them are pissed off after last year allowing 288 rushing yards to South Carolina in a game where everybody was like, "Hey, this is kind of the game where the team quit on Dan Mullen." So I think that Florida's got a little bit more riding on it, but as always, I think they're going to give up some points because that's what they do. You know who they are.
Well, Brandon, with my prediction, this might surprise you a little bit, honestly. I'm going to be honest, Gamecock fans. In terms of South Carolina's defense versus this Gator rushing attack, I think this is about the absolute worst matchup possible for South Carolina. South Carolina's given up an average of 187.5 yards against Power 5 opponents this year. Florida, I believe, ranks in the top 25 in rushing offense. They have three legitimate rushing threats: Anthony Richardson, Montrell Johnson, and Trevor Etienne. So when I look at this game, I look at South Carolina's linebacker core. If I'm Shane Beamer, I'm talking to those guys and I'm saying, look, this is a game where y'all got to show up. Y'all got to lead the charge. 6-year seniors, Sherrod Green, Brad Johnson. You know, this is y'all's last time playing against the Florida Gators. It's your final 3 games in your, or your final few games period in your college career. We need y'all to lead this defense in this game. It's going to be a tough game in the swamp. Brandon just mentioned all the external motivation that the Florida Gators are probably going to have coming into this game with the senior day and, what happened last year and the bad memories of that night and all of that. And I just don't think South Carolina schematically, based on what they've shown over the last few weeks, I don't think they can stop this Gator offense. I just don't. The Florida Gators pride themselves on the running game. They build everything off of that. And I just don't think South Carolina can contend with it, honestly. And then when you look at the offense, I think that South Carolina, it's all going to depend on Marshawn Lloyd. I literally think that he can make or break their potential to win this game on the offensive end by himself. He is that important for this team. If Marshawn Lloyd is playing, there's no doubt he is probably not going to be 100%. Deep thigh bruise is nothing to mess with as a running back. So you'll probably see Jaheim Bell get some snaps back there once again, maybe not 18, 19 carries, but you would still probably see him get some snaps. Christian Bill Smith, Juju McDowell, you're going to have to carry more of a load this week. You're going to have to step up because Lloyd's not going to be able to do it this week. And South Carolina's O-line, look, they still have struggles in run blocking. Marshawn Lloyd, I think, has to get the most yards after contact in the SEC at the running back spot because there's still too many guys that penetrate through the offensive line up front. Florida might not be great in terms of the statistics. They still got dudes up front. Gervon Dexter, he's going to be a problem, in my opinion, for the interior alignment for South Carolina. So Spencer Rattler, I think this is a game where you got to go ham. You can't throw for like 185 yards and a couple touchdowns. I think that you might have to throw for like 250 plus, maybe around 300 if you want to win this football game. Because South Carolina's defense, I don't think is going to be able to stop Florida for the majority of this game. You might have to bend but don't break in terms of this contest. So overall, I think Florida covers. I just think that from a matchup standpoint, it's just not in South Carolina's favor. So I got Florida winning this game 38-24. So they cover that 8-point spread, and the over/under being set at 59. I think that goes over. I definitely think defense will not be at a premium in this game. So again, I could be wrong, but I've seen this tape before with South Carolina, and I'm just not going to buy into it this time.
Don't you just love that? I feel like every SEC host that I've done a crossover with, it's just like nobody is confident. Like we all just like we're all like, yep, something's gonna happen. We've just been burned so much. Unless you're Georgia or Bama, everybody's just like like LSU is a great football team now. They improved significantly. When I was with Caroline, she was just like, I don't even know. we're just gonna see what happens with it. It's great. SEC, it just means more, But it's also the
Really does.
elite program, the elite universities just constantly hurt our feelings, and I can't wait for it. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait for this game. I'm Brandon Olson, Locked On Gators. Andrew Lyon, Locked On Gamecocks. Make your second listen Locked On SEC with Chris Gordy. And Andrew, you, like every other SEC host, has gotten to see this. Check out the best coverage on the best conference, including the best university, the University of Florida, right there on Locked On SEC.